Good afternoon. I'm Christina Rice, Senior Librarian of the Los Angeles Public Library Photo Collection. Thank you for joining us for The Photographer's Eye, a long-running program where photographers are invited to share and discuss their work, and archivists delve into photographic collections. This is our second virtual edition of The Photographer's Eye, and it is going to be our last for this year. And just in case you are not aware, the library does have a massive collection of images documenting life in Los Angeles from the 1850s to the present. Many of these images have been digitized, and we're adding more every month, and you can search them by visiting tessa.lapl.org, along with all of the library's in-house digital collections. I also invite you to view our recently launched online exhibit, Life on a String, The Yale Puppeteers and the Turnabout Theater. So there is an in-person version of this exhibit, which I curated and have been working on for about over 3 years now. It was supposed to have opened in our Getty Gallery at Central Library this past April, and it is going to open at some point. But in the meantime, we wanted to give everyone a sneak peek into this incredible exhibition, including parts of an audio tour that we recorded in our Octavia Media Lab at Central Library last year. Today's program is sponsored in part by Photo Friends, a nonprofit group that supports the photo collection in a variety of ways. And in addition to sponsoring programming, my incredible board members on Photo Friends, they fundraise, they've published books using the library's photos, they help curate exhibits, they even help pack up and deliver large photo donations. This is something that happened just a couple of weeks ago. And they highlight the photos in our collection on their website, photofriends.org. Now, I am pleased to introduce today's presenter. Photographer Michele Asselin is known for her formal portraiture that examines individual identities within larger social constructs. She began her photographic career in the Middle East, where she briefly worked for the Associated Press, covering current events, primarily in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. After moving back to the United States, Asselin worked as an editorial photographer, with images featured in The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Time, and more. She also has completed public art commissions here in Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., as well as our neighbors in the city of Inglewood. Today, she will be talking about her series focusing on the closing of the Hollywood Park racetrack, which resulted in the book The Clubhouse Turn, published by Angel City Press earlier this year. And during the course of the program, please feel free to add questions into the comments section, and we'll pass those along to Michele at the end of the program. And now, Michele, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
So much. Thanks to the library, always to Angel City Press, to Photo Friends, and for everybody who zoomed in to listen to this program, for your interest in this project, this place, and this community. So before I show the body of work, I'm going to just give a little bit of background of how I came to this project. So I learned about Hollywood Park racetrack when I was in my studio. I had a studio in Inglewood, California. It was less than a mile away from the track. It was sort of a large, it actually was an old Toyota dealership, and it had been converted into artist studios. So there were maybe 40 artists working there at any given time. And each fall, the city of Inglewood and the artists of Inglewood organize an open studio weekend. So we would open up our studios to anybody who wanted to come by, people from the neighborhood, people from the art world, people from other cities nearby, to see what the artists of Inglewood were doing. And the weekend that opened, I had been working on some portrait series around the issues of domestic labor. And so the work that I had in my studio at the time was sort of formal portraiture, in studio, dark backdrop of individuals around these issues. So I was talking to people as they were coming through and telling them a little bit about my work. And then all of a sudden, a large group came in. I don't know, it was like 8, 12, 13 something, and started looking around. So it was a notable size for an event like that. And they started looking around the studio and asking me questions. And then all of a sudden, sort of a circle formed, and they all started talking about Hollywood Park racetrack. So, and they were all affiliated with the track in some capacity, some the track that existed, and many with the redevelopment effort that I was learning about, was about to be shut down and torn down and completely transformed. So I was curious, of course. This was a place that wasn't on my radar. I grew up in the city of Los Angeles. I had a studio that was less than a mile away from Hollywood Park Racetrack, but I had never actually been there. My family wasn't a family that would like spend a weekend going to the horse races. It wasn't sort of part of something that I did, even though I had been many, many times to the Forum, which was right next door. They sort of, the parking lots touch. Anyhow, so I was talking about this building and this structure and the history of Los Angeles. And so the project really interested me for two reasons. The first was I had just finished these long portrait series, and I had been working fast with individuals in studio, very formally lit. And I was looking to get out of the studio, to work with natural light, to maybe work alone without sort of a living subject, to go at my own pace and have like a meditative experience. I had never really photographed interiors or details, architectural structures. And so it was appealing to me to just sort of have a change. But the other reason was I was so curious about the massive urban transformation that was about to happen. And, you know, here, like you can see in this image, this is not anything that I photographed, but this is the aerial view of what Hollywood Park was, right? So you had the track in the middle with the lakes, you had the grandstand and the casino on one side, you had the stables and the barns on another side, and it amounted to like 280 acres, almost 300 acres, right in the middle of densely populated Los Angeles. I mean, you can see Los Angeles around, and how this huge piece of land, single use for the track, was going to be a monumental shift to the neighborhood and to the city once it was taken down and transformed. You know, if you've ever flown into LAX and looked down as you were approaching, you would have seen this. It's right in the flight path. And if you've flown into LAX in the past 4 or 5 years and looked down, you would have seen like a huge hole in the ground, a construction site, and then finally the Ram Stadium being sort of erected from the ground up. Anyhow, so I became really interested in this project, and I headed over to the track. This is a collection of images that I shot the first time I ever visited. So I was able to, I had a contact because of the people who had come to my studio. And the second I walked through the door, I knew that I wanted to do this project. I knew that I was going to have to figure it out, and I was going to have to get access, and I was going to have to get funding. But there was no question that I wanted to photograph what existed and what was in this structure and on this piece of land before it was demolished permanently. So this group of images I shot with my phone. I was there for maybe an hour or two with someone who was showing me sort of the back rooms and the back hallways and the public spaces. And I just quickly took this group of images so I could throw it into a proposal and try to figure out how to get the project started. And so this is the beginning of the thinking of what became the book and the work. So now I'm going to just quickly, for anybody who zoomed in who doesn't really know the history of Hollywood Park, I'm going to give a very brief history just to put it all in context, and then I'll show the series. So June 1938, Hollywood Park Hollywood Park Racetrack was opened by Hollywood Turf Club, which was the organization. Some Hollywood moguls got together to open it up. And this drawing is by Stan Johnson to sort of show sort of the concept of what Hollywood Park was supposed to be and the glamour that they were striving for. In 1938, Seabiscuit won the inaugural running of the Hollywood Gold Cup. In 1942 to 1944, during the war, it was closed and it was used as a storage facility. In May 1949, the grandstand and clubhouse were destroyed by fire. In 1950, the park reopened. It was known as the Track of Lakes and Flowers, as you can see here. And this is a staple of the track, the Goose Girl, who would float in a boat in the middle of the lakes as part of the glamour of the track. In 1984, the very first Breeders' Cup was hosted at Hollywood Park. In 1991, $20 million was spent trying to improve it. It was one of its many revitalization attempts. In 1994, a casino was added. In 2005, it was sold for the final time. In 2013, a letter of closing came from the president, Jack Liebau. And December 22nd, 2013 at 6:11 p.m., the final race was run. In 2014, the complex was demolished. So that's, the 75-year history of the track. Now, this image I took 6 months after I had finished the project. And I show it was sort of an interesting moment for me. So after I I sought out funding and I got the access, and I knew I was going to be able to do the project. It took some time and there was negotiations involved. And so by the time I was able to start, I had 15 days until the track was going to be closed to the public. And in those 15 days, I basically lived there. And I photographed over 25,000 images, and it ended up being architecture and details, the races, some reportage, and over 400 formal portraits, which you'll see in the next little bit. And then I went back to the studio, I took a breath, and I started to edit. And it took me over a year to edit all of it. But I was a couple months into the editing process, and I realized that I didn't have a photograph of the front of the building, the approach to the place itself, which felt kind of crazy to me, right? Like, it's sort of documentary 101. You're doing a huge project about a place and you set the scene, whether it's an interesting photograph or not, you just sort of have an establishing shot. And I hadn't taken this picture. So of course I ran over, my studio was right there. I ran to the parking lot. Thankfully the building was still standing and I took this picture. And then I went back to the studio and I really sort of raked myself over the coals, like, why hadn't I done that? And why hadn't I thought to do it? And finally, what I realized, and what you'll see, is that the Hollywood Park that I knew, that I came to know, the one that I did this project about, was a world that happened once you entered those doors. And the campus, it was a circular campus with the grandstand on the front, the stables on the back. But sort of, in order to participate in the goings on, you by definition had to turn your back to the outside world. It was a very insular, closed place. And so while it was open to the public, it was a world unto itself. And so the project that I'm about to show you, and what turned into the book, was what happens when you walk through that front door and the world inside. Okay, so now here's the work. On a cool and sunny Wednesday afternoon, December 2013, I pulled into a massive parking lot in Inglewood, California. My plan was to photograph Hollywood Park Racetrack before it was closed forever. At the time, I was a portrait photographer and had spent many years capturing the subtleties of facial expressions, watching carefully how happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and surprise unfolds in the muscles of a face. The work of portraiture is exhilarating, but profoundly exhausting, and I was interested in shifting my attention to buildings, particularly buildings that had been lived in and well-worn. I liked the idea of working with less and working alone, and I was curious. What does a building reveal? How is a building like a face? Growing up in Los Angeles, I had spent many evenings right next door to Hollywood Park. I had watched Laker games, basketball at the Summer Olympics, and countless rock concerts at the Forum. Although the neighboring track was enormous, 300 acres, the equivalent of 40 Rose Bowl stadiums, I had never paid attention until now. The central building was exactly what I'd hoped for, full of scars and personality. I knew then that Hollywood Park Racetrack was a perfect subject. The interior design was so contradictory, it was hard to tell what era I'd landed in. The 1950s, the 60s, the 80s. It was as if a dozen different aesthetics were battling each other. Limestone walls led to tartan carpets, which led to elevators with gilded dials. There were hallways painted pink, lined with cracked mirrors, and hallways painted cream with gold-flecked wallpaper. The flooring was patterned carpet, then green and teal checkered linoleum, then concrete. The Turf Club elevator had an old-fashioned perch for the operator. Every stairway, restroom, and alcove featured a different color palette. There were framed oil paintings of horses, wall-sized murals of horses, and signage and ornate gold lettering. A mid-century beauty salon was dressed up in chrome and white vinyl, and a rustic wooden bar looked like it belonged in a Belgian alehouse. There were no races scheduled that day, so the building was practically empty. Maybe because of the emptiness, it felt heavy with secrets and faded grandeur, as if ghosts were lingering in the air. I walked down a curved, wood-paneled hallway once used by horses to enter the track. I imagined the sound of hooves clomping and jockeys murmuring. I pictured the thousands of empty red plastic arena seats filled with people cheering, winning, and losing. The sixth-floor press box was strewn with old newspapers and racing forms. Beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, there were faded phone lists and beige telephones, the kind with thick, coiled cords and a red button that lights up. Everything sat lifeless, coated with dust. But with no effort at all, I could imagine it as a busy, frantic hub, phones ringing, the bugle starting a race, people shouting as they watched the track. That first visit reminded me of a house I used to play in when I was a child, a friend's grandmother's house. The house was elegant, modern furniture, a sunken living room, a curved staircase, and a huge glass window that looked onto a Japanese garden. But then the grandmother died, and the house felt transformed. Without its inhabitants, it felt frozen in time. Once the house was no longer the backdrop to my friend's family's life, I realized it had its own story. I had often thought about this house as an architectural version of the Velveteen Rabbit, the stuffed animal from Marjorie Williams' classic children's tale. In the story, the rabbit receives so much affection it comes to life. Hollywood Park seemed to be under the same spell as the rabbit. The next time I visited the track, it was race day. I was surprised to see the building teeming with activity. There were dozens of employees, waiters, bartenders, shoe shiners, security guards, clerks, accepting bets, and making payouts, and enough patron to make it seem busy, although apparently not busy enough. It was widely known that the track would soon be demolished, and it seemed to me that people behaved with extra intention, doubling down on their habits and traditions, watching monitors, placing bets, serving hot dogs, ignoring the inevitable. The visitors represented all of the diversity of Los Angeles. Some seemed to belong to the track of another era, dressed up in well-preserved clothing from decades past. Others looked contemporary and sporty. There were people of all ages and sometimes multiple generations visiting together. I watched a young hipster couple dressed in vintage clothes, gamely chaperoning a great uncle to his final Hollywood Park race. I noticed a couple dressed in black tie finery, the wife wearing a fur coat and the lipstick the color of orange meringue. Across the room, there was a worker who seemed to have come directly from the job site, his clothes splattered with paint from head to toe. Some people had driven for hours to get there, while others lived across the street. I met more than one guest who remembered attending Hollywood Park summer camp in the 1950s. The visitors expressed the romance and melancholy of the impending demolition as energy and excitement. Everyone had a program in hand. I got to know some of the regulars. Racetrack Betty, a neighborhood local, charged a small fee to collect winning for people who didn't have to report them to the IRS. Lawrence had been the maitre d' of the turf club and planned to retire in Brentwood when the park closed. Dick, employed for longer than most, had worked as an usher for 65 years. The bugler was named Jay, and his uniform was like that of a circus ringmaster. With a crop green jacket and tight jodhpurs, his bugle signaled the start of a race. In between races, he worked the crowd, tipping his top hat and posing for pictures. The announcer, Vic Stouffer, sat in a small room on the roof to get the best view and kept binoculars and statues of horses on his desk. I was free to roam where I wanted, and I did. I learned about worlds I didn't know existed. There were the jockeys, for instance, who knew each other well. Professional horse racing is a small world. Jockeys don't often travel with a particular horse and might not know about the temperament of the horse they'll ride. Once they have their racing assignment, they're not supposed to interact with the outside world so that they don't make a deal and throw the race. The jockeys were sequestered in the jockeys' room on the ground floor, and a manager named Charlie made sure no one came in or went out. The jockeys had a chef, their own, Alfonso, who wore a gray handlebar mustache and cooked anything requested. The center of the track, the infield, was itself a destination. It had been beautifully landscaped with exotic flowers and a series of lakes. There were flamingos and the remnant of a huge wooden goose that had floated in the water with a beautiful woman seated inside. She wore a dress reminiscent of the German fairy tale and was called the Goose Girl. I spent time on the backside where the stables were. The backside was almost like a rural western town with barns and dirt roads. It felt surreal to be at once on a farm and in the center of Los Angeles. Some of the workers permanently lived in rooms above the horses, so the backside had all of the amenities necessary to sustain a small community: cafeteria, mini market, laundry room, game room. There was a veterinary office and a lounge where visiting trainers could sleep. Everyone on the backside woke up around 4 a.m. because the horses needed to be run before the grandstand opened. By 7, most were in line for breakfast. Many of the workers were from small towns in Latin America where they had learned horsemanship since childhood. The highest ranking position was the trainer, and the lowest was the hot walker, who walked the horses after the race until they cooled down. The owner of the cafe, Debbie, served 3 meals a day, and in between drove a golf cart around, peddling chips and soda. Flypaper dangled from the ceiling outside the cafe and everywhere else. Hollywood Park was ostensibly all about the horses, but I was originally drawn to the park as a structure. Then it became obvious that it was a community too, warm and fragile, woven together like a loose-knit sweater. I couldn't extricate the building from the people, and I was surprised that I ever thought I could. The resulting book of photographs contains no actual horses. Instead, it celebrates the existence of the track's eclectic, harmonious group. Over the course of 2 weeks, I photographed not only the interiors of the track, but also more than 400 individuals who lived and worked there or went to the races. I isolated them each against a dark backdrop and asked them to pose however they liked. With each sitting, I was consumed by the question of what would happen when the park closed. Where would each person go when they couldn't go to Hollywood Park? Would they be lonely? Who would have a broken heart? Was I the only one thinking like this? The crowds began to seem to me like extras in an episode of The Twilight Zone, oblivious to the impending doom. In the movie version, in my mind, I imagined someone screaming, "Don't you all realize this is ending tonight and you'll never come back here again?" The room would be quiet for one slow motion moment, a long pause, and then real time would click back in place and people would resume placing bets, ordering hot dogs, and cheering for the fastest horse. It was almost impossible to stop taking photos, but finally on December 22nd, 2013 at 11 p.m., my hand was forced. The crowd filed out for the last time as the loudspeakers played "At Last" and "Happy Trails," Some people were crying, some were singing, some were nonchalant. Those trying to filch a little piece of history, a sign or a doorknob, were stopped by a security guard. When the last person exited the grounds, the gates were locked. The horses were loaded into trailers in the coming weeks and moved across town or to Oklahoma, New Jersey, or Kentucky. The auctioneers sifted through what was left, and then in 2014, Hollywood Park was raised. After 15 days of circling the grounds, hauling my equipment from place to place, I was 12 pounds thinner and had hardly seen my kids. I'd taken 25,000 photos. It would be a year before I finished sorting through them. I wondered what I had fixed in time. The end of something, evidence of its existence, traces of time. I tried to keep in mind what an arborist had once told me, that it's okay to cut down a struggling tree as long as another is planted in its place. I hope the same is true of buildings. With this book, my aim is not to provide a historic record, but to transmit a feeling of place, of existence, and of an ending. The book muses about a time that was and about an inevitable foreclosing future, photographed during a rare period when the past, present, and future were all equally palpable. So now, this image, I leave you with the voice of someone who knew the track much, much better than I did. And this final image taken at the very end of the grandstand still standing with the track itself demolished, ready for construction.
And that's it. It's a lifetime thing. The beauty of the racetrack is that if variety is the spice of life, then in terms of the human race, there is no greater spice rack than the racetrack. You got guys on in the grandstand scooping up tickets off the floor, hoping to find a winner, and you've got guys up in the director's room that are literally the wealthiest human beings on the planet Earth. I'm talking about the sheiks and the kings of Saudi Arabia, the Queen of England, the biggest movie moguls, just literally the richest people in the world to the poorest people in the world, and everything in between. So from the ground floor up to the 5th floor and everywhere in between, you never know whether you're standing next to a multi-billionaire or you're standing next to some guy that's going through the garbage can praying that he's going to find a $5 voucher that somebody threw away, or a ticket that got dropped that is worth $4.40.
So that's the project.
Okay, thank you so much. I have questions. I have many questions for you.
Okay.
But I do want to point out one of our viewers, Steve Brady, has commented that he was a regular. He went there regularly and is very excited about the photos. So thank you, Steve. I hope this brought back really good memories for you. I'm sorry to say I never went to Hollywood Park. So again, I went to lots of concerts at the Forum and would see it and would think, oh, that's some place I should go. And even when I knew it was going to close, I meant to go and just never did. And so, I think it is such a as somebody who oversees a photo archive, and we get lots of requests for architectural photos, lots of the times for places that don't exist anymore. And a lot, usually are not able to draw on sets of photos like this. So it really is incredible from an architectural standpoint that you were able to capture so much of it. Although I do think it's fascinating that you went into it to not do portraits. And then that ended up becoming
what are you going to do?
Such a component of it. It's just in your blood. In regards to the portraits, though, I found it interesting that they're all on this very, this black backdrop, that's just very dramatically lit. And I wanted to ask you about that decision to not, to look at the photos individually. You would not have a sense that it was Hollywood Park. And so what was that decision to not have Hollywood Park as an actual backdrop, but to just have them be very standalone portraits?
While I was there, because the whole thing came to me very fast, as I sort of talked about, and once I got to the site, I didn't have much time to do the work itself, but also I didn't have one of the best things about this project is I didn't have a lot of time to think about it even before I got there. And so a lot of the work was done intuitively, and it was a knee-jerk reaction to the place itself. So I wasn't sure actually what I was going to do once I started. And I did I did photograph a lot of people in situation. And there's a lot of work that was done at that time of people in the environments, there's a lot of activity and the races. And then when I went through and tried to distill what was important for me about the project, I ended up not using any of that work. And I felt that the separation of the community from the environment was a much more powerful way to tell the story, because any one of those people could have been in any one of the environments at any given time. I kind of described my time there. I felt like I was a fish in an aquarium, and I just kept like swimming in a circle. But every time I swam by a different place, I was like high or I was low, and it was a different plant, and I was passing different fish. So I feel like people moved around that building very fluidly. And so to anchor any one person in any one place felt like a misrepresentation to me. And I wanted to get people away from this objective, factual, they are here at the races, and really look more about who the community was as individuals in the face of this story. And it felt like the best way to do it was to separate them from the environment and then sort of fuse them back together.
Okay. And so did you have like a stationary place where you were doing the portraits, and were you like grabbing people in terms of the community?
Yeah.
Like it's this tight knit community, did like word get around, hey, she's taking pictures of all of us? And did they start coming to you, or did you have to pull them in?
So because it's such a huge place, and there's so many different places you can be, right? So like on the grandstand side, you've got 6 floors, and it's like the president's floor is on the top, and then it's the turf club, which is like a more expensive ticket, and then you have mezzanines where people have subscription boxes, and then you have the public floor, and you have off-track betting off to the side, right? And then on the back, you have the stable side. You have downstairs of like the administrative offices and the jockeys room, and then of course the track is in the middle. So it was important to me to capture as many of the people that were participating in the park as wanted to be captured. So some people were really interested in the project and cared a lot about what was going on, and some people didn't want to be involved. So what I would do on the days that it was open and people were actually there is I would set up a seamless backdrop and lighting in different areas. So one day I would be by the turf club, and one day I would be by the jockeys room when I was trying to capture the jockeys, and one day I was on the stable side, and one day I was sort of by the administrative offices. And so people moved around pretty fluidly, and you could see the same person on 4 floors in one day, depending on if they were getting a soda here and a ticket here or watching from a particular spot. But I would move the backdrop in an attempt to capture people that were, so everybody could have access to the backdrop if they wanted it. And I don't know, we sort of semi-advertised what we were doing. And in some days I would sort of talk to people walking by and see if they wanted to participate. And other times we would have like a huge long line of people who had heard about it that wanted to get involved. So it was a mixed bag.
Fascinating. We have lots of positive comments, and people are ordering the book, I think, as we speak in real time. One of the other questions I had, so just as a photographer in the digital age, you said you shot around 25,000 images. For this particular project, like, do you consider the photos that are in the book, like, is that the project, or are all 25,000 for
Right.
like what constitutes this project for you?
So this project is a distinct set of images, and that was the edit. Not all of those images made it into the book. This project has also had other moments. So the first time it was ever seen, it was seen at the Orange County Museum of Art for the 2017 triennial. And there it was an exhibition, and it was on the wall. And I had actually, as I had pulled apart the imagery, what I realized that for exhibition purposes, that I wanted to bring the work back together. And so those works are multi-image. So one piece is maybe 4 or 5, 6, depending, images anchored back together through like a framing structure. So that was on the wall. And then this book came afterwards. And so it's been seen in these sort of different outlets and different forms. The set of images that I consider to be the end project is the same, but different parts of the different images go different places. So when we were designing this book, I couldn't include everything, but we did include a lot of it.
And so, down the line, your body of work, hopefully is donated somewhere. Like, is it all 25,000 images that are going from this project, or it's the edit?
That's the outtake. I mean, so I think it's the edit, and the edit is, I think the edit is maybe like I don't know exactly, but maybe it's like 450 images. It's so many because of the portraits. And in this book, there's almost 300 images. So there wasn't a ton left out. Maybe it's almost 400 images. So only 100 images are left out. There were so many portraits, right, that we just couldn't include all of them in the end. And then the environmental work has like a distinct set as well. But no, I think the stuff that was left out, like anything, right? You have 10 negative contact sheets and you choose your project, and the other ones still exist in the world, but you wouldn't consider them as part of your series in the end.
Right.
So they're just, I don't know, on a hard drive for eternity. Never to be seen.
I know. The whole Born Digital thing, we have like, I've been so scared to even, or so intimidated to even delve into from an archival standpoint. And
it's a lot.
And we need to. So I know you've been working, doing a lot with this particular project. Have you launched into any other photographic projects since this one concluded?
Well, I mean, so what ended up, my series after this happened on the same site, but it was a very different series. So in 2014, I heard that it was going to be torn down. So my work stopped as they closed the gates to the public, because really in the end, the community, what was the most important thing for me. And it was sort of set against this super beautiful layered backdrop, right? But it became more about the community than it was about the structure. In 2014, I was installing some of this work in what became the new casino, weirdly. And so I was over there all of the time. And the only existing structure was the casino building. And they kept it operational because it was revenue producing, right? And so they built a new casino off to the side, which will now be there forever, whatever. And what I learned as we were installing in this new casino is the old casino was going to be closed. And they were trying to figure out at what moment one is closed and the other is open. Of course, I'm obviously interested in subjects around this sort of moment in time. And what happened was they, at like 2 or 3 in the morning, because the casino is a 24-hour deal, at 2 or 3 in the morning, the new one was ready to go. They came over, they told everybody who was there gambling, okay, it's time. And they like scooped everybody up, moved 200 yards across the parking lot, plunked them down, and like gambling kept going. And so I learned that this was about to happen. And I was working with one of the managers, and I was like, don't touch anything in the old casino. Like, I just need a day. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to go back in there because it was the next moment, right? Like, if I had photographed this project of the moment until the gates closed, all of a sudden there was this moment where it had been sort of evacuated. And I landed on this room in the casino, so empty and being torn down, that had, this all sounds kind of crazy, but that had this wallpaper from like 1632 France, made from original wood blocks. And it had been put in this one wall of this back room that was clearly designed at some point in time to be this very exclusive, glamorous dining room that looked over the track and was part of the casino. And I did an entire project about this wallpaper that was super expensive. It was like $25,000 for 10 feet of this wallpaper, like really expensive. And then because of what had happened to the casino, their ideas for the casino was this incredibly glamorous moment. But the casino went the way the casino went. And so they put plexiglass over this wallpaper to preserve it and screwed nails and screws in to hold the plexiglass. And then the plexiglass got all dirty and destroyed. And so this wallpaper had this like incredible history of like attempted preservation and being ruined by what it was attempting to preserve. And it was fascinating to me. So my series right after this was all about this wallpaper. And it didn't turn into a book. It was an exhibition at a gallery in Hollywood.
Are there, is there an online version of that, or if the wallpaper picture has been posted somewhere?
On my site.
On your site.
It's called Commons. That project is called Commons.
Okay.
It's amazing. I mean, it was such an accident, and it's, in my opinion, like it's very different from this, but it obviously relates.
Yeah. I'll be doing that as soon as we get off here.
I know, it's a crazy story.
That's wonderful. And so finally, my last question for you is, were there any, did you develop any friendships or relationships with any of the people at the park where you still keep in contact with them?
A few people I'm in contact with. So many of those, the subjects of those portraits, I wish I was in contact with. But when we were there was just no way to spend a significant amount of time with anybody, really. I spent a lot of time with someone who worked for the park, who sort of was my chaperone a little bit. And he was helped me in the 15 days that I was there. I've stayed in touch with someone named Kip Hannon, who actually contributed the timeline that's in the book. So in the book, there's we did 50 hours of audio interviews. So that runs through because I felt like voices from this time period were going to be really, really important. And it wasn't something that I could accomplish while we were also shooting. So a documentary filmmaker did 50 hours of interviews that we've woven through the book to give that perspective and that sort of testimony. And then a guy named Kip Hannon, who became sort of the official archivist of Hollywood Park and still works with the UCLA collection, did the timeline for the book. But I also had some very fun phone reunions when this book was happening, because I had to call and confirm that all of the names were exactly right with all of the subjects. Mm-hmm. And so there was some just great talking to people that I had photographed. Like, I ended up in this long conversation with the daughter of the woman in the fur coat who had lost her husband, and her experience with Hollywood Park. And she was trying to get to the opening, and just nice like that. So people that I had met for a brief moment in time that I was able to reconnect with when I had a little more time, when we were trying to sort out the book captioning.
I am so happy to hear that the audio interviews were done, because as I was seeing the portraits and hearing, and I had no idea that there was this live-in community. I thought, oh God, it would be great to have, oral histories. So I'm thrilled to hear that.
Yeah, we have as much oral history as we were able to accomplish in that short period of time, but at least it's something. And that quote the audio at the end was from a guy named Jimmy the Hat, who was a professional gambler, horse race only, and had been there for, decades, I think.
Yeah, which Steve, who's been commenting that he attended, he identified Jimmy the Hat.
Exactly.
Along with a few others.
He was the greatest guy. I mean, I really depended on people who knew the place better than I did to help me with this project. And people are so generous, right? In helping to memorialize something that they loved.
Yeah. That is fantastic. So the book is out. It's available through Angel City Press. I can't thank you enough, Michele. It's been an odyssey this year. We were supposed to have you at Central Library I think in April. And so I'm glad we were able to finally make it happen.
Me too.
So thank you so much. And there's the link on the screen for Angel City Press. Thanks again. And, take care, and I hope we'll see everybody at Central Library at some point.
That's right. Thanks so much for having me.
Take care.